Hello friends, Anderson here. Welcome to the final episode of our world building series for Scarlet Heroes using Worlds Without Number. When we started this series, none of this existed. We just had a rough idea that we wanted to create a massive fantasy mega city as a backdrop for a thief campaign, likely, that we're going to embark on using Scarlet Heroes. But now we have a lot, and we also have some open questions. How many? Well, I didn't have that many when I started out because things weren't quite as fresh in my memory, but I went and rewatched all of the videos that led us to this point, and well, now there's a few. Just a couple. A handful. And we're going to answer all of them today in this 6-hour epic. No, we're not going to do that because, and this is something I've found about this process using Worlds Without Number that I really rather like about it. It really provides you with something akin to a source book, a good RPG source book once you're done with it. And I mean it in a sense that every source book that I consider good, any campaign guide, any city resource, leaves me some dangling hooks to hang my adventures from. And if I were to categorize the set of questions that have emerged during my rewatch, I'd say there's a good amount of those. And those are the ones I would not like to answer today because they are going to effectively set us up with future stories for us to engage with. I'll give you some examples. For instance, who is behind the embezzlement problems that the black marketeers are having? Is it perhaps Chandra as a sort of an initiative to weaken them, or what is going on? What cursed thing has the black market acquired that is causing them dire woe? Who stole Chandra's book, actually? What happened to the decadent ambassador that got the Chandran embassy into trouble? Are they still in the city leading some sinister cult as we suspected previously? Some decadent demon worshippers or old god worshippers or something of the sort? What even is a demon? But, let's get to that eventually. Some are also questions that I feel like we don't need to answer right away, but I would like to catalog them because they might yield interesting plot twists in the future, such as, do any Geza dynasty members still persist in the world somewhere, the descendants of Ilona, the founder of the Elonate Commonwealth? Do we want or need to know anything further about the insane leaders of the Cabal? Do we know enough about the rapacious local lords outside of their implied existence as members of the assemblage, because they are one of the local problems? What was Wisland all about? Was Ilona perhaps God's blooded and Wisland is a manifestation of Cabal interests that were triggered to depose one of the last remaining God's blooded lineages in the world? And when Wisland was wiped out, how, practically speaking, did that storing of the life energy of the denizens work? Is there some capacitor out there that the Gunnardi clavigers try to get into Coleraine now? How long ago was this? Probably a while ago, since things have settled down and it was actually more the Chandran embassy on the outs than the Commonwealth representation in at least recent years. But these are all things that are sort of floating out there, and they are more intriguing in a way that they could cause a backdrop for future stories. So we keep this list of immediate plot hooks and historical events implying the existence of people, items, things like that for future reference to create further stories. But then there's also a bunch of things that we, I think, need to know more about. And those are the things I would like to answer today through the help, again, of either connecting some dots or using further random tables, specifically the Tome of Adventure Design and the Ultimate Toolbox, potentially, Worlds Without Numbers, perhaps. And I'll link the full set of questions in the video description down below, as well as floating them by here earlier, I've categorized them into questions about the gods and planes of existence, Coleraine surroundings, Coleraine, historical events, important organizations and figures, and I would like to tackle a question about gods first. And that is, what more do we need to know, or do we actually need to know more about Irvan? I think we do, because it's a nice thought experiment of how does he interact with his adopted city, the city that adopted him as the patron deity, one of them. So does he manifest in Coleraine? Does he work through avatars or emissaries? Does he occasionally appear in the disguise of some beggar or thief or something of the sort? Does the existence of a thieving crime deity also imply the existence of, well, a religion of thievery or some form of ritualistic crime in service of the god? And what plane of existence can we find Irvan on, and how does one enter it? And I think what popped into my head there is that I feel like as gods go, he is quite hands-on, but also indirect in his meddlings. He's not ruling or governing the city. He rather sees everything as some kind of connected web of intricacies, intrigue, and all sorts of opportunities, and knows instinctively through his divine gifts what strings to pull to cause the most amusement for himself. And I think, especially since we also have Kishori, the heir to the Chandran, to the prosperity of Chandra in town, that Irvan is accessible in some way. There has to be some kind of palace, and I feel like it's also probably quite an exposed building that is kind of hanging over the city proverbially, but also maybe literally. And what I pictured when I was thinking about this was some kind of old structure poking out of the ground left over from Gunnardi's workshop as it unevenly collapsed to form this city, and some jagged, almost like an exhaust pipe from days of yore that is now crumbled and looks more like a jagged mountain peak or a cliff face rising up from the ground level of Coleraine, and that clinging to the top of that ancient structure with a great view of the city, of the spires rising up to almost meet its height, there is a palace just precariously hanging to this old Gunnardian workings exhaust pipe, and the palace with its pagoda roofs and its intricate lights that you can see from down below is a maze of confusing corridors and decadent designs and gold and lavish construction. And it's unknown how to really access it. You find yourself there through a variety of means from down in the city. The, I think, priesthood of Irvan, really some kind of decadent, maybe brothel operating syndicate, has ways to get you there. Maybe you have to imbibe some kind of lotus extract and you wake up in Irvan's palace. And that this palace itself is even not entirely real. It's the entrance to Irvan's plane of existence. So it's much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. That's kind of what I was thinking in the direction of how I would like to have this. So we have an additional landmark now. We have this hanging palace of Irvan, his own Shangri-La kind of thing, where rumors are floating around and nobody really knows what's going on. And there's a lot of people claiming they've been there, but generally speaking, the people that have been there don't talk about it much. So that's one thing I wanted to clarify. One open question, like how Irvan manifests. Also, if we have planes of existence shaping around the new gods, does that mean they also existed for the old gods? I think it does. And then the question is, what became of them? Did they collapse with the death of their patron deity? Did they just persist abandoned, like some no longer lived in house that is slowly declining and deteriorating? What dangers does it come with? And what happened to the ones where the deity isn't actually properly dead, like Ofra's essence somehow being stuck in the Offrites, like Gunnardi in his machine or titanic workings form. By the way, the Gunnardi working itself is also an interesting conundrum, because I'm thinking now in hindsight, and also thought it as I was talking about it, that Gunnardi is the reason that this force field exists that protects the city, actually. So we'll make a note of that too. But regarding the planes of existence, I think at least some of them still exist and are accessible to the Cabal, because that is where their leadership meets. I just like this mental image of this scene of these insane former high priests and powerful liches now congregating on some abandoned dead god's former hunting grounds or plane of whatever afterlife was designed for the faithful of that particular deity, where it all is now spiraling out of control and continents are breaking apart and they are just gathering there in this fragmented chaos with rocks floating around and whirlwinds and everything. And it's this little island of calm where these stoic ancient liches are hatching their plans and interacting with each other. I think that's what became of some of the old pantheons' planes of existence. And of course, for the new gods, there is now, well, they are around. So they have their entrance ways there. Some may be more directly accessible, like Irvan, some less so, like perhaps Daraja. And then, of course, there's Viola, who is kind of a fragmented entity and who is being co-opted by the Cabal, because we assume that Viola is actually friendly inclined to the sentients that overthrew her brothers and sisters, but that her church is largely, at least in Coleraine, co-opted by the people that want to bring these old gods back. Does Viola still have a plane of existence? Does the Cabal have access to it? That's also an interesting question, but I think that's one we don't necessarily need an answer to. We just need to know the Cabal has access to a lot of, or some of, the old gods' planes of existence, and I think the Gunnardi Clavigers also can access this counterpart plane of unreality that Gunnardi is tied to, and maybe that's where Gunnardi's spirit is partly kept, whereas the manifestation of Gunnardi is entrapped in some sort of workings that is currently protecting the city. One interesting question that I have not been able to come up with an answer for yet, and that I think I don't need an answer for right away, but if you have an answer, feel free to shoot. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, as you've been doing. Thanks for that. Anyway, feel free to shoot. Question was, Gunnardi, what was Gunnardi's demand to the followers of Gunnardi prior to the Gods' War and the death of the gods that made them so pariah, anathema to the other sentients? What was it that Gunnardi made the followers do that made them abhorrent to the fellow sentients? I can't think of anything really. It kind of suggests itself to be some sort of body horror theme, but other than that, I'm not sure. Maybe it was simply that they were forbidden to experiment on themselves and they had to experiment on everybody else. That could be a thing. So more like being victimized by them in the ancient times made them outcasts, but I'm not entirely sure. And I don't think I have had the best idea to this concept yet. So if you have one, fire away. One more thing, two more things that are tied together actually that really stuck out when I rewatched the previous videos was what makes the megaplex that we assume is out there so deadly to visit. What precautionary measures are necessary to take as well, so you can actually delve those ruins and bring that tainted or primal paragon back. And what is the implication of the note that we got from the volcano design that time and space sometimes are a bit in flux here? And I want to both extend this note from the volcano to the entirety of this area surrounding the pit, so also the megaplex, that the volcanoes are just the boundaries of. And I want to tie that together, that part of the danger is also part of what makes the time and space convoluted, as they say in Dark Souls. And what that brought to mind was some kind of roguelike design philosophy in a way, if we talk video games, and that is that if you set out on an expedition out into the megaplex, well, you have to get through the dust storm, the wraith storms, the impenetrable, sight-stealing ash mist that has been persistently blasting these former godlands, these palaces and grandiose design and structures that existed here when this was still the land of the gods, and now it's just a storm of ash and dust that you cannot see through, raging outside of the pit, that is not going into the pit, that is just blasting over the pit, so also somewhat stealing the sunlight, casting cold rain in perpetual twilight. And one of the side effects of this is that no path that you take through the storm will always ever lead you to the same destination. I think that is the time-space thing rearing its head. That's also an explanation why perhaps it is such a mysterious and dangerous profession. You can never trust what you find when you embark on an expedition. Now, I believe over time there will have been techniques developed to maybe re-find some sites that you've located. So let's take our old friend, the dwarven god of minor inconveniences or something. There was a palace out there and it was located and it has some kind of magical signature that is possible to read out by various means. I think the official guilds do this in a very different way than any kind of unofficial expedition. So there are the official magical academic ways, the jury-rigged ways, and the less reliable ways of just doing this by almost like an inborn instinct, maybe like a tint of God's blood in somebody who then becomes a very competent navigator to just find their way through this storm field and back to a location that they've already been to just by sheer gut feeling. But to find a location that you've previously found down there in the storm, on the plains, in the blasted lands, you need some kind of navigation assistance. And I think that also implies that a lot of sites that were there, legendary sites of the gods, some palaces, some workshops, some Elysian fields, have not been found yet. So every now and again there is some amazing discovery that, of course, the parties that find it try to keep secret, and then there is like a race to get that information, to get the coordinates, to find a navigator that can get you there to exploit it. I feel like that's a nice little touch to our megaplex, that it's so unstable that you will have a hard time encountering the same thing twice if you just set out without any kind of plotted course following magical signatures. I say magical, it's probably more like a divine thing, but some kind of divination magic is behind it to trace that divine heat signature that gets you to that location. I hope that makes sense. Like, it's kind of a strange concept to get across as I talk about it. I just have a very firm idea in my head how I picture it, so maybe we'll encounter it during play. Maybe we actually set out on an expedition for whatever reason, getting our thief embroiled in signing up for some almighty cause with a huge payoff, and of course an unreliable navigator. We'll see. Now, one more historical event that challenges us to find an answer still, and that is one I would like to use the Tome of Adventure design for to answer, is when high ministers of the assemblage, who were committed to a really bad idea, supported an evil group's schemes, and that evil group were participants or the descendants thereof of an unholy ritual. What the fuck was up with that? So we know there's an evil group that schemed, that were participants of an unholy ritual, or their descendants nowadays, that have their hooks somehow in the high ministers still. We of course assume it's something to do with the Cabal, but we don't know any details, and I feel like maybe the Tome of Adventure design can help us there. Now what I specifically want to do here with the Tome of Adventure design is devise a relic, because I feel like we need to give this backing of the scheme a little bit of a tangible outcome. And the scheme itself probably was to grab power for this group, this unholy ritual participants, and the ritual was also a way to either create or power this relic. And why is the assemblage involved in this? I feel like probably it has something to do with the last major crisis that happened in Coleraine, because this is an event in relatively recent memory, and it has something to do with the occupation of the city by Wasteland forces, which were, as we assume, backed by the Cabals. So it follows from there that probably this group that assisted there was either the Cabal being very double-dealing, or it was some other group, which, you know, not everything has to be that one Cabal, that used it to buy itself the entry into power that it didn't have before. And presumably, maybe with the focus on the descendants here, that means that perhaps a descendant of that ritual participant group is currently a member of the assemblage, some kind of cult fanatic who has the inexplicable backing of several high nobles because of the, well, maybe the control or whatever it is that this relic turns out to be. It will tie into that. So cult is approached by desperate assemblage. They know they're evil, they know they're up to no good, but it's the lesser evil right now because the city is being occupied. Can you help us? Yes, we can. Sort of similar what happens with the Clavigers, but I think that's probably what the assemblage tried next, because initially they didn't want to be beholden to the Clavigers because they trust them even less. So that group found or had or created this relic. What's the relic? Let's find out. Nature of the relic is a D100 roll. Let's give it a go. 74, remnants of a hero or saint's body. Okay, so it was... Oh wow, that could be nasty. Yes, trust us, we are a cult of good necromancers, and in this hour of dire need for the city, we can bring the remains of, I don't know, the last Darajan emperor back, or some mythic hero, or maybe the physical remains of Daraja herself, like a relic of some kind. That's a bit much. But it reeks kind of necromancy, that the cult was able to provide the hope of driving out the new oppressive force by bringing this mythical figure back to life. And let's see where it goes from there. So details of relic is another percentage roll. 15, that makes it the ashes. Oh, okay. So it's like a sacred ash housing the spirit of... Maybe it's like a... Oh, if only we could ask what Emperor Ludicrous the 27th would do in this situation. We're so desperate, us poor Darajan assemblage people that are just keeping the seat warm. Can we confer with this, here's the ashes? That could be an interesting hook. Yeah, let's go with that. So the scheme was a grab for power by some unholy necromantic circle that got into the good graces of the assemblage at a point in time where Wasteland was occupying, by giving them a conduit to the voice of a long-dead, militarily brilliant Darajan, god's-blooded former ruler, and by doing that secured some kind of lifelong heritage codified right for representation of their little guild in the assemblage. So we have a guild of kind of necromancers masquerading as apothecaries or something like that. Maybe like spirit healers, undertakers. Well, yeah, we don't need that detail particularly now unless you have an idea, but we have them sitting there, and be kind of a stain on the honor of the assemblage because they did something rather shady in a desperate hour and they are regretting it ever since, and they have to kind of look at the representative of this horribly misguided scheme attempt. Next thing I found, the Church of Viola as the Cabal front has a debt hold over the assemblage currently, and how was this codified? Is there some sort of concordat, maybe like a written treaty of in our hour of need sort of treaty that allows them certain pre-written rights that other churches do not have? I think that's probably the logical conclusion here. Maybe the Church of Viola is allowed to levy church tax from the nobility, who grit their teeth because they don't want to pay this, and maybe the Church of Viola is playing it smart and doesn't make the poor people pay it, because we know that they are kind of poverty focused in this place, like leveraging the power of the masses. But maybe they're allowed to some extent, cash in on the nobility and the guilds, and also maybe levy some manpower for construction projects, something like that. I think that's probably an interesting expression of this debt, that there is a treaty going on that forces the government to pay a certain sum that is collected from the nobility and the guilds periodically. Now, there's a few odds and ends left that have to do with important organizations and figures and some historical events, particularly Chandra and Jezebeth, and I tie those two together for a reason, but it also brings me to a slight, I wouldn't say problem, but a philosophical approach question on how I want to run this Scarlet Heroes series, because the thing that I am about to tie together here, that I had pop into my head on the rewatch, is very much something that would be, if this were an RPG source book indeed, would be in the GM players do not read section. So if you want that kind of knowledge, plot relevant knowledge, to persist both in the world building and the narrative leading up to playing out the scenes, I'd be very curious to hear your opinion. Like, I will reveal it now in this video, and that's also pretty much the last thing I will develop in any kind of detail now. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether this is something you like to see, or it's something you'd rather me show rather than tell by expressing it in the fiction. Something I have to keep in the back of my mind about sort of our meta plot that I'm not immediately sharing with you, but revealing through the fiction in the Scarlet Hero series. What's your preference there? Do you want me to show it all before, or do you want me to reveal it in the fiction? I don't think I will do this the same way in every series anyway. I'm just asking now for the purposes of making the Scarlet Heroes actual play. Should I reveal it all, or should I keep some of the connections I make between background elements to myself and sort of surprise you with them as I go through the story? Let me know. For now, I will share my thoughts, and those thoughts are relating to what happened to Chandra and what drives Jezebeth. Now, we remember Chandra became the first of the Ophrites after the God's War, as the essence of Ophra was mostly absorbed by Chandra and his followers, whereas Ophra's counterpart, Tanaya, was absorbed mostly by Daraja, who then became this immense deity, whereas the Ophrites became sort of a cursed blood phenomenon, who see themselves as the new god folk who are destined to rule the world, at least some of them. With Chandra being such an iconic figure and immortalized in the name of the prosperity of Chandra, it kind of stands to reason to wonder what happened to Chandra after Chandra died, if Chandra died. And I think Chandra died eventually after a long, century-long life. And then what? Then a body perishes that has a strong tie to the essence that is still kind of attached to it and woven through it of a dead, rather evil deity. And that deity also has a strong desire to come back and rematerialize. And I think what happened, because it would serve our campaign quite well, is that part of the spirit of Ofra, the consciousness of Ofra, rose after Chandra passed away in Chandra's body several days after the body disappeared. So Chandra rises, the body now the home for the consciousness of Ofra, and where does he go? Well, he goes to Coleraine. He goes through Coleraine into the wastes where it all happened, where Ofra died, and sets up there and tries to figure out ways to come back. Exploring the wastes, trying to piece it all together, scheming, plotting, assembling followers maybe, not cooperating with the Cabal perhaps, I'm not sure. Maybe it's also that Ofra has some kind of ties to the Cabal but tries to control them and doesn't reveal what Ofra is. But Ofra is out there and nobody really knows about this except for a descendant of Chandra who has a strange hunch that something odd happened to her forefather. And this descendant of Chandra, a certain Jezebeth, has come to Coleraine to figure all of that out. And to do so, she uses whatever means necessary to get the power, the information, the paragon, all of these things. And she's trying to find out what happened to Chandra's body and follows up on leads that it somehow ended up here and out there in the wastes, which is why she involves herself in all these black market activities with all these explorers and with all these ruin delving parties, why she seeks the power, the connections. She wants to find out what's behind this because she fears that her people, the Off-Rights, are somehow the vessel being still somewhat tainted and controlled by the not really quite dead spirit of the horrible deity Ofra. That was my connecting the dots. How could we deal with Chandra and what actually makes Jezebeth tick? I think greed itself is just a bit uninteresting. So why is she doing this? Well, she's doing this because of almost a rather pure motive, which I like. You know, someone doing a lot of nefarious deeds and being very ruthless for an almost pure motive. That's a good anti-hero slash villain. And that leaves only one thing and one big question that we haven't answered. I said I'm not going to answer in detail anything more, and I won't. I'm just going to explain to you why I want this particular one, and that is the surrogate. Because outside of them appearing as a sort of figure attached to Elanis and attached to some other goings-on in the assemblage and such, we don't really know anything about the surrogate, and I would like to keep it that way, because we're playing a thief character who is maybe not even aware who the hell the surrogate is, and that is convenient for the dungeon master side of things, especially when dealing with randomly generated plots, because we already have two corners of the triangle, but that makes the third point rather flexible, where we put it. We have Elanis, we have Jezebeth as the sort of string pullers in a kind of triangular relationship where Elanis tries to use the surrogate against Jezebeth, Jezebeth uses Elanis, and if we now flesh out the surrogate, we are somewhat locked in, and it makes it a lot harder to roll with oracle results pertaining to this triangular relationship if we want to derive some adventures for our thief from it, in whatever way, shape, or form. So I'm leaving the surrogate a question mark, because if we get to it, and if we have an oracle result, and that requires the surrogate to be a certain way, they can still be that way. If we now decide what they are, we have to bend our oracle results around too many information pieces that we've set up that we don't even really need to know right now. So surrogate remains a shadowy cutout for now. And So do a lot of the other questions that we have noted here, because they do set us up for future adventures, so I'm not going to answer them. I'm just going to leave it here. I'm going to end the series here. I will reflect on this series in a follow-up video, more of a looks at kind of video, just to really somewhat more concisely review this as a world building tool, campaign building tool, setting building tool for solo RPG campaigns, but also regular RPG campaigns, because I find it rather amazing how well this process works, what it sets you up with, and just the breadth of the content that you can generate by sticking to its formula. So I'm gonna do that, but I've got to compartmentalize, put it in a separate video. And for now, we are done with Coleraine in terms of setting it up. My next step now is to write this up almost as a little source book for myself that I will also share with you. I want to have some kind of map made as a additional set piece for the Scarlet Heroes series, because I do know a very, very, very good fantasy map maker. I just happen to work with him, and I would like to have that in place to make a rundown video of the setting. So you don't, if you want to follow a Scarlet Heroes series, you don't have to watch a whole, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours worth of Worlds Without Numbers content. So I want to break it down into like a 10-minute video of here's the world, here's the setting, here's the history of the relevant pieces that we established here, and then we'll start playing. So it'll be a few weeks before we can kick off. For now, I thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time, and bye for now.